Hi class, so today we are reading chapter 5 and chapter 6 of The Boy Who Could Do What He Liked. I know some of you are going to be reading along and I know some of you are reading out loud this week, so I'm really excited for that. But we'll get ourselves started. Just to let you know, Harley and Bella are around. They're chilling at the moment, but we'll see how long that lasts. Okay, Alfie decided to make the best of it. He went and sat at the table with his plate and knife and fork and glass of water all ready. The trouble was that Mrs. Stokes, who according to his having tea time routine, was meant to get Alfie's meal out of the oven for him, but she wasn't with him. She was still in the toilet. She'd been there, Alfie realised, for quite an alarming length of time. He would have been more concerned were it not for the number of strange groaning noises she was making. He'd rather not have heard those sounds, but at least they convinced him that she wasn't, dead. Finally, he heard a flush, followed about 2 minutes later by the sight of his babysitter humping her Zimmer frame down the hall. "Mrs. Stokes," said Alfie, "it's broccoli bake for tea today. Jenny will have left it in the oven, so maybe if I help you with your walking frame, you can." But Mrs. Stokes just carried on towards the living room. Alfie sat there for a bit, not knowing what to do. He was shaken out of his reverie by the sight of a boy on a bike flashing past the window. A very familiar boy on a very familiar bike. "Oh no," thought Alfie. "Hey!" shouted Freddie Barnes, for it was he, turning around and cycling back in front of the window. "It's Alfie! Boring, boring Alfie!" Yes, Freddie Barnes did sometimes shout that at Alfie, just as Jenny had feared. After a little while, saying the words "boring, boring Alfie" over and over again, whilst laughing and pointing, which must have got dull fairly quickly, seeing as he was on his own and with no other bullies to share it with, Freddie cycled off. Alfie shook his head, got down from the table and went through into the living room, where Mrs. Stokes was sitting in the armchair, watching Strictly Come Dancing on TV. She looked completely engrossed. "Mrs. Stokes," said Alfie, "it's time for my tea." "Well, actually," he added, checking his watches, "we're already a bit over. We should have been plated up 11 minutes ago. But anyway, you're meant to bring me my tea." "Yes, dear," said Mrs. Stokes, without moving her eyes from the TV. "Just do what you like." Alfie frowned. "Pardon?" "I said, just do what you like." Alfie wasn't sure how to take this. But you're meant to be bringing me my tea. Then in the next 15 minutes I was supposed to eat it. Then I clear up, bring my plate and cutlery, a glass over to the sink, and help you load the dishwasher. That's scheduled to take between 6 to 9 minutes, depending on the size of the meal. Broccoli bake shouldn't be as lower end of that, I think, which is good because we're already running late. "Yes, dear," said Mrs. Stokes. "Absolutely, just do what you like." And she turned up the volume of the TV. Alfie didn't know what to do, so he ran round the house, back into the kitchen, upstairs to his bedroom, stopping on the landing to go into the bathroom, and then back down to the living room. He collected all the bits of paper from all the various walls and then handed them in a neat pile to Mrs. Stokes. "Mrs. Stokes," he said, "these are my evening routines, my having tea routine, my clearing up after tea routine, my homework routine, my limited amount of TV routine, my bath routine, my cleaning my teeth in the evening routine." Is that very different from your cleaning your teeth in the morning routine?" said Mrs. Stokes. "Well, no, they are pretty similar," said Alfie, slightly surprised that she'd heard what he'd been saying. "Anyway, there's also my getting undressed and putting pyjamas on routine, and my going to bed routine." "That's nice, love," said Mrs. Stokes. "No, but you don't understand," said Alfie desperately. "We're already—" He looked at both of his wrists. 14 minutes late with having tea. That means all the other routines will be 14 minutes behind schedule. Unless we can make up some time, maybe on homework, or I guess I could have a shorter bath, but we need to get started." All right, dear, said Mrs. Stokes, handing all the pieces back to paper. You get on with it. Just do what you like. Chapter 6, 6:49. Alfie remembered what his dad had said. Just stick to your routines. It was clearly no good trying to get Mrs. Stokes involved, so Alfie decided to get on with it on his own. He took all the paper routines and laid them out in front of him on the kitchen table. He didn't, after all, need a grown-up to help him through them, did he? Well, unfortunately, yes. The first one, for example, the one that was already 16 minutes late now, theoretically, he could do having tea by himself, but that meant going very off limits in the way the routines were meant to work. He was supposed to be in place, having laid the table by 6:30. His stepmom or Stasia would bring him his tea. For him to bring himself his tea confused everything. Not least because his tea was in the oven on quite a hot plate, and he knew he wasn't supposed to get hot stuff out the oven. That was definitely a grown-up's job. There was one upside to all this. Even though he'd accepted that it was already what he had for tea on a Saturday night, secretly, Alfie didn't like broccoli bake. He thought about getting something else, but then he looked in the cupboard. Most of the tins and packages in there contained stuff that needed cooking, which he also couldn't do on his own. And time was ticking by. He really needed to get to his next routine, clearing up after tea. But this presented both a practical and philosophical one. Could he clear up after tea when he hadn't actually had any? He could clear the table and bring his plate, glass and cutlery to the sink. But he hadn't used them, so did he actually need to be cleaned? Anyway, he didn't know how to switch the dishwasher on. A grown-up had to do that. This was the practical problem. Then, after that, there was homework. It was science, a whole essay he was meant to write about the difference between mammals and marine animals. Tonight. He needed a grown-up to help him with that too. Next on the list was a limited amount of TV. He couldn't do that either because Mrs. Stokes was sitting in front of the telly. Alfie didn't want to go any further down his schedules. He couldn't get the next 4 tasks done. There was just no point. He simply couldn't be sticking to his routines, which was what his dad had told him he had to do. Alfie felt a rising panic in his throat. He knew at some level that his world was falling apart. He tried to sweat and quite a large part of him wanted to cry. He started to sweat and quite a large part of him wanted to cry, which he hadn't done for ages, not since his mum had died. The feeling in his throat got worse and a shout came out that was a half scream. It might have been wordless, but it wasn't. It was 2 words. Mrs. Stokes! It was the last attempt to get the old lady to come and do her bit to make the routines happen. Yes, dear, a voice came through, crackly as ever, from the living room. I don't know what to do, shouted Alfie. This undoubtedly was playing into Mrs. Stokes' hands. Oh, well, she shouted, just do what you like. Just do what I like, thought Alfie. Are you going to say that over and over? Just do what I like. Just do. All right, then, Alfie shouted, thinking as the time was ticking away and his routine slipping past. He held up his hands in exasperation, and suddenly he noticed, because his hands were up in the air, that both of his watches had stopped. Ooh. So it looks like, guys, time has now stopped. Now that's interesting. So today we're going to be doing something on time stopping with superheroes. So I can't wait to see that. It's going to be awesome. Now, I wonder if I can get Bella to come up and say hello to you guys, or Harley. Bella, what have I got? What's this? What is it? Come see. Oh, what have I got? Let's have a look. Here's Bella. There's Bella. Oh, and there's Harley coming to see what I've got. So they're my 2 doggies whenever I always say that they're there and they're in the room and they're talking. Harley likes to kiss. Hello, Harley. Mwah, good boy. And there's my Bella, waiting patiently now for a treat. that I'm going to have to go to the kitchen and get them. Right, guys, I'll be in class.